Hello, I'm Sheryl McCarthy of the City University of New York. Welcome to One to One. You may not know Claire Altman by name, but you're probably familiar with her organization's deeds. She is the new president and CEO of Volunteers of America, Greater New York, a major provider of services to homeless families and individuals in the city and surrounding areas. It's been helping New Yorkers for more than a century, and the range of its programs is staggering. So is its ability to engage so many in helping those who are less fortunate. Welcome.
Thank you.
I suspect that, like me, probably a lot of New Yorkers don't know about Volunteers of America, although they'll probably be familiar with some of the things that it does. How did it get started, and what's the organization's mission?
Well, we were started by two early social reformers in the 1890s, Maud and Ballington Booth, who came here from England and set about to address a number of the human service issues that they saw at the time, which, interestingly enough, are some of the similar issues we deal with today. Alcoholism, people coming out of prison not having a place to go, homelessness, families in need. And they began to build up a cadre of volunteers, and they reached out to their friends and neighbors and influential people to make donations. In those days, there were not paid social service organizations. It was truly a volunteer organization. And it grew, and in fact, Maud ran Volunteers of America through the 1940s. And then by the 50s, the national organization moved to Washington, D.C. area, and we became the Greater New York affiliate. There's some 34 affiliates around the country. We're the largest. And we provide, as your introduction said, a range of services to homeless individuals and families, as well as victims of domestic violence, persons with AIDS. We're the largest provider of supportive housing to veterans in the area. And our mission is essentially to help those who are the most vulnerable to get a leg up, to be able to move to independence.
So did the organization actually start here and then branch out nationally, or did?
Yes.
Okay, okay.
We're the mothership.
Okay. Now you're called Volunteers of America, Greater New York, but are your programs run primarily by volunteers? I know you have significant paid staff.
We do.
1,200, 13, how many?
Right, about 1,300.
Okay, and how many volunteers are we talking about?
Well, we probably have a light number at last count, about 1,300.
Okay.
I think it morphed, Sheryl, over the years. In the early part of the 20th century, there weren't paid social service agencies. And as, one of the things I see that as communities kind of broke down, and Mayor de Blasio is talking a lot about that, and we've seen it more intensively in the last 20 years. But in yesteryear, communities took care of people, and then they were helped with volunteers. As communities have broken down, not only in New York City, but across the country, a lot of the work has fallen to government. And so government is the main provider of funds, and we're a major provider of all of these services with large contracts with government. But at the same time, we supplement this work with volunteers. We have many, many corporate volunteers who help on everything from our Operation Backpack, which we last year filled 16,000 new backpacks for homeless children in the New York City area, not just in our shelters, but all of them, to corporate volunteers who come and do projects. Bank of America recently came and painted one of our veterans' housing projects, to individuals who tutor, who provide mentorship. And I'm very interested in expanding our cadre of volunteers.
But it's about half and half, volunteers and paid staff.
Indeed.
Let's talk about some of your programs. I mean, you have, as we said, numerous programs for homeless individuals and families. How many shelters do you run yourselves?
We run, in New York City, 3 large shelters, 2 on Ward's Island, 1 in Jamaica for women, and then we run a large, in fact, the largest in Westchester County. So those are and then we run about 6 family shelters. So the first ones are individuals, the other ones are families. And in those units, we probably house about 1,500 people on a nightly basis.
Now, I mean, we're always hearing about the city shelters. Are your shelters different from the city shelters? Are they
Yes and no, in that the city operates some shelters itself, and it contracts with providers for others. The city owns many of the buildings that are referred to as city shelters. They own the buildings on Ward Island. They own a number of the buildings that are family shelters. I think we both operate kind of under the same rules, but there's, they're different.
Right. So would the majority of the shelter beds, would the majority of them be contracted out to private organizations or not? I know there used to be city shelters in the armories, big shelters.
Right.
Do they no longer exist? Or?
Pretty much, they
okay.
don't. I think over the last 10 years, the city has moved to contracting most with nonprofits. The city does operate some shelters themselves.
Okay.
And, some are historic, like the ones on Ward's Island. Family shelters grew up because there needed to be a place to house families, and obviously the armories weren't a good place. So the families are in kind of apartments, but in a transitional mode.
Okay. And how do they get to you? Do they go through, I know used to be these intake facilities. Do they get to you through the intake facilities?
Yes, they're now called assessment facilities, but the path is the same way. They go to an assessment facility, the city sends them to us, and our job is to provide housing, link them up with mental health, behavioral health, healthcare services, and then try to place them in permanent housing. And hopefully along the way, those who are employable also in jobs. And then the city has a sort of back-end process. If someone is very non-compliant, the city is in charge of sanctioning the person.
Now for years, you heard about the horror of the city shelters. Has that improved? Is that?
I think so. Certainly our shelters are places that I'm proud to walk into. The one difficult challenge is that they're oftentimes in very old buildings, which have old infrastructure. And it's hard to vacate the building to completely redo the infrastructure. But that aside, I think they're clean, they're well lit, they're modest, but I think they are much better than the kind of shelters of yesteryear. And you don't see people on cots in an armory floor.
Do they still have the SROs?
Well, SROs are another feature. In my first foray into housing in the 1980s, when I was at the Vera Institute and was asked to bring a team down and look at why there was a spike in homelessness. And then we had one men's shelter and one women's shelter, both on the Bowery. And we did a survey of the people coming to the shelter for the first time. Where did you live last? And contrary to the popular belief at the time, most did not come from mental hospitals. Most came from SROs, which were mom and pop operations, and the mom and pop died, and their kids didn't want to continue it, or they couldn't afford. That was the period of gas price hikes, and they couldn't afford it. So they abandoned a lot of these. The city lost over 100,000 SRO units, which had been modest affordable housing to single individuals back in the late 70s, 80s. So the organization I spun off from the Vera Institute, Housing and Services, created the first model SRO, which was using the same model, but with good social services embedded. So people still had single rooms, sometimes shared bathrooms, common areas, but the difference was that we had real social services to support people. And we pioneered moving people from the shelters to that. Now, Volunteers of America, our organization, operates all of the city-owned SROs. There are about 6 of them. They're fairly large, about 150, 170 people each. And in those situations, people can live there on a long-term basis. They pay a third of their income for rent, and the city helps to subsidize the balance.
Okay. Now, and I read an op-ed that you wrote in which you are calling for greater coordination of the whole shelter system. How would that work differently than it does now?
Well, and I think we already see the de Blasio administration moving in the direction of looking to see a more systems approach to things. We know homelessness is not a discrete area, that housing, healthcare, mental health, substance abuse, they all impact. And so what we would like to see is that there's greater coordination amongst all the stakeholders, and that you can, you might, be able to do a more complete assessment of people, and then track those who maybe are more job ready and more housing ready and need fewer services, move them along the continuum more quickly. And I think there's going to be receptivity in the de Blasio administration with the appointment of Deputy Mayor Lillian Barrios Paoli as the Deputy Mayor for Health and Human Services, Gilbert Taylor as the Commissioner of Homeless Services, Alicia Glenn as the Deputy Mayor for Housing, to work together, recognizing that homelessness is not just a discrete, narrow area. It impacts all of these.
Right. I mean, there are so many organizations that have shelters. I mean, some of them are just 10 beds, and does anybody coordinate all of those?
Well, and if they're contracted with the Department of Homeless Services, certainly Department of Homeless Services does that. There's no question. And I think, New York City does an amazing job. I know that you're probably aware it's the only city in the country that has a right to shelter that is a court-mandated requirement. So it means, that's part of the reason that we have 50,000 people housed nightly in shelters either operated by the city or nonprofits. But the coordination is a very big task. I think the city does a good job of it. I think we as the providers can be helpful if we're at the table to help design the kind of services that need to be provided and coordinate. We're the ones on the ground. We need to coordinate with the local mental health provider, the local health provider, so that in a way that we can rebuild communities. Ward's Island, we have almost 700 people. It's a community of large size right there. Mm-hmm. And one of the goals is that we can have some more targeted services.
And that's a facility, a shelter that you operate there?
There are two. They're
okay.
Side by side.
Okay, okay. We're going to take a short break, but we'll be back with more with Claire Altman, President and CEO of the New York chapter of Volunteers of America, Greater New York. Welcome back to One to One. I'm Sheryl McCarthy of the City University of New York, and I'm talking with Claire Altman, President and CEO of the Volunteers of America, Greater New York. You have a number of programs for veterans. Are veterans a especially, I'm going to say, needy group?
I think so. And we serve two groups. I think we have one or two Korean War veterans, but largely either Vietnam era veterans or recent Iraq, Afghanistan, Gulf War veterans. But they have similar needs in that, as one veteran said not too long ago, we've trained them to do things that they're not supposed to do when they come back to this society, which is to kill people. And so there's a huge adjustment process, and I don't think most of us lay people realize the intensity of Iraq and Afghanistan with the kind of IEDs and weaponry and so forth that is common parlance there. So you're going from a very intense, highly structured environment to coming back. Many of the veterans from our recent engagements, all volunteer Army, did not go in with a lot of skills, and if they were combat veterans, they may not have gained a lot of skills while they were there. And so they're coming back having to start over with building skills, building or rebuilding family structures, feeling a part of us. These days, veterans make up a very small percentage of the population. So if you're a veteran, you feel like the 1%, or maybe it's the 10%. Many people don't understand what you've been through. So we find that many veterans like to be in a housing situation with other veterans. They feel some comradeship. They feel comfortable. And I find that's even true with the Vietnam veterans who now are aging in place and may have families, but they find a certain comfort with being with other veterans. So what we try to do is provide a base of supportive housing, link them to the VA, which now actually has quite good medical and health services. But
does it really? I mean, if you are a veteran, I mean, one used to think that if you're a veteran, you can go to a VA hospital and get your health needs met. And then I think there may have been a period of time where that wasn't so true, but is that actually true now?
It very much is true now. And the VA, from the national leadership down to the local leadership in areas, has worked very hard to make that clear to people. The VA did an overhaul of their medical system a number of years ago. They were one of the first with electronic health records, and it really is a state-of-the-art health system now. But there's still a lot of rumor about how it used to be and some reluctance. And then we've heard about the time it takes to process disability claims and so forth. So we try to be a bridge and help people deal with getting the services they're entitled to and they need from the VA, as well as local job services and then housing. We're the largest provider of supportive housing for veterans in the New York City area, housing about close to 900 now in a variety of settings. We have a safe haven model where people can come who really don't want to have to meet many entry requirements, and they can come in sort of no questions asked, and we help them get to sobriety. We help them get to a place of being willing to accept services, because sometimes they're so down and out they've really shut everybody out. And then we can help move them to supportive housing. We have several supportive housing residences, including one that we just opened in Brooklyn a couple of months ago for women veterans and their families. And then we are, on our drawing boards, are plans to build some permanent housing that would have a certain set aside for veterans so that they could live there and pay affordable rents.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a big need. The Undersecretary of the VA in DC, Tommy Sawyers, is a very impressive young PhD Rhodes Scholar, decorated veteran who's really trying to get the word out that VA services are good and they are accessible and they are welcoming. But
are there VA hospitals in New York? Where are the VA hospitals?
We have one on 23rd Street on 2nd Avenue. There's the Bronx VA. So those are the two biggest ones in the New York City area.
Now, I was looking at your website. There's such a dazzling array of programs, those programs for those living with AIDS, for victims of domestic violence, for adults with mental illness, for adults and children with developmental disabilities. I was sort of interested, you have a case management program for older adults that allows them to stay in their homes as opposed to going into nursing homes. Is there an income eligibility for that? Is this mainly for lower income people, or is it for anybody?
Well, I think the people who come to us are largely lower income. It's funded by the city's Department for the Aging. There's not a strict means test, but I would say that a lot of the people who utilize our services are lower income people.
Because, you know, I think a lot of middle class families, you know, who are dealing with elderly relatives would love to have this kind of support, but can't afford to pay for it, and Medicare doesn't cover it.
Right.
So, I mean, that's really...
No, there is a big need. And we, VOA nationally, and then we will be doing this locally, have developed a model of care coordination, which is really to have people now with Affordable Care Act, many more people will be covered under health care, and certainly elderly people have Medicare. However, as you say, Medicare often doesn't pay for that kind of care coordination to keep people out of the emergency room, to keep them
Out of nursing homes.
Out of nursing homes, in their homes. Once they get discharged from a hospital, there's a very high, unfortunate return rate within the first 30 days. So the care coordination model that VOA nationally is just rolling out, and we hope to implement it here, could be particularly helpful to elderly people, to have people on the ground who visit the elderly, who see if they have the medication they need, see if they're taking the medication, to be able to liaise with the provider, the healthcare provider, to say something's not happening correctly here. You really don't need high-level nurses to do this. You can use paraprofessionals trained to look for the right things, go into the home. They won't do treatment, but they will be the eyes and the ears, or as some people say, the boots on the ground, to understand what the people need, report back so that there is coordinated care. And I think with that, we will see, as a society, if we can implement this more broadly, an avoidance of things like nursing homes, which we all know are not the places people want to be, and they're very expensive, and people having a better quality of life.
Now, I know that VOA takes part in the Hope Street Survey, which is a canvas of public places to estimate the number of people who are basically living on the street. This takes place, what, in January or February?
Last night.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness. And who does the survey? Is this completely volunteers, totally volunteer?
The number I heard is that there were to be 3,000 volunteers last night. VOA probably had 100 plus on the street. I was recovering from the flu, so I didn't participate. But basically, from about midnight to 3 a.m., people have gone and gotten some orientation at some hubs from about 10 to midnight, and then they go out from 12 to 3. And if they identify someone who appears to be homeless, that's recorded, and they're offered an opportunity to go to a shelter. So I guess it takes them a while to tabulate the results. But
so, I mean, you have so many areas in which you provide services. How do you decide which areas of need you're going to address? Do you have a board that decides this is going to be our focus for the next couple of years? How do you decide that?
Well, yes, with any nonprofit, we have a board, and our board is particularly committed, very hardworking. And as you noted at the beginning of your show, I'm new to Volunteers of America. We have traditionally served the most vulnerable. So it's all the groups of people we've just been talking about. But I think the direction of our board right now is to continue to do this, but to work on the next steps for people in terms of permanent housing. We have 2 permanent housing projects in construction right now. Both are in the Bronx. Both will have a set aside for vulnerable populations. They'll all be low income, but some will be for people with mental health problems and other problems. As I mentioned, we're going to be doing some permanent housing for veterans. So we see permanent housing as a key. I was just at a forum with the 5 borough presidents earlier this morning, and every one of them is talking about the need for affordable housing and the importance of it. We all know we've lost a lot in New York City. We're pleased that the economy has been good in New York City, but that's forced out a lot of people. So from figuring out how to use NYCHA housing more effectively and maybe build housing on the grounds of NYCHA buildings, which often are on kind of big campuses, to preserving Mitchell-Lama housing, and to making sure that we don't lose rent-regulated housing that we have. So it's both a preservation and a development need. And I would say that our board is particularly focused on that, as well as linkages. We can't do everything, but we can link more effectively with existing providers. In Brooklyn, Pam Breyer, the president of Maimonides, has led a 50 organization collaborative to provide mental health services to some of the most needy in the South Brooklyn area. We don't want to replicate what other people are doing and doing well, but we want to make sure that we're linked in. And oftentimes, the homeless population doesn't link into these collaborations because they're the forgotten large number, not the forgotten few these days.
We got probably about a minute left. So if there are people out there who are interested in doing volunteer work for a good cause, should they contact you? What should they do? What do you?
Yes, absolutely. We have a volunteer coordinator at our main office and in our sectors. So go to our website, www.voa-gny.org, and click on volunteer opportunities. And we screen volunteers, we help place them in areas that they're interested in. And I say that, and our board would agree, and our senior staff, that we can't do it alone. We need the citizens of New York to help out. And when that happens, it not only provides a useful service, but it also helps the population we're serving, be they homeless or veterans or people with AIDS, feel that somebody cares. And that's important.
Okay. We're out of time. I want to thank Claire Altman for joining me today. If you'd like more information about the Volunteers of America, Greater New York, as she said, go to their website at voa-gny.org. For the City University of New York and One to One, I'm Sheryl McCarthy. If there are any people you'd like to hear from or topics you'd like us to explore, please let us know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you.